Why did God speak through a burning bush? Have you ever seen something that looked completely impossible? Like a tree on fire that somehow never burned up? Imagine walking through the desert, minding your own business, when suddenly you see a bush glowing with flames. You get closer. The fire is burning. The bush is surrounded by flames. But somehow, the bush is still there, not turning to ash, not falling apart, just burning. And then, suddenly, you hear a voice coming from the fire. Yeah, that sounds like something straight out of a movie. But according to the Bible, this is exactly what happened to Moses. And what makes the story even more interesting is that Moses wasn't looking for a miracle that day. He wasn't standing there saying, "God, please give me a sign." He was simply doing his job. And that ordinary day was about to completely change his life. So why did God choose a burning bush? Why Moses? And what was God trying to tell him? Let's go back to the beginning. Moses had already lived a pretty unbelievable life. He was born in Egypt during a dangerous time for Hebrew families. As a baby, he was placed in a basket and hidden among the reeds of the Nile. Eventually, Pharaoh's daughter found him and took him in. So Moses grew up inside the royal household of Egypt. Pretty crazy, right? But Moses never forgot where he came from. As he got older, he became aware of the suffering of the Hebrew people. They were slaves in Egypt, forced to work under harsh conditions. One day, Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew man. Moses became angry. He stepped in, and things went terribly wrong. Afterward, Moses became afraid and fled Egypt. He left behind the palace. He left behind his old life. And he ended up far away in the land of Midian. There, Moses started a completely different life. He got married. He had a family. And he became a shepherd. Think about that. Moses had once lived around Egyptian royalty. Now he was walking through the desert taking care of sheep. His life probably felt very ordinary. Maybe he thought his biggest adventures were already behind him. But he was wrong. One day, Moses was leading the sheep through the wilderness near Mount Horeb. And then, he saw something strange. A bush was on fire. At first, Moses probably thought, "Okay, that's weird." But then he looked closer. The bush was burning. But it wasn't being destroyed. The flames continued. The bush remained. Moses couldn't ignore it. So he said he needed to go over and see this strange sight. And this is where the story gets incredible. As Moses approached the bush, God called out to him, "Moses, Moses," and Moses answered, "Here I am." Then God told him not to come any closer. He was standing on holy ground. God was revealing himself to Moses in a way Moses had never experienced before. And Moses was afraid. He hid his face. But why a bush? Why not thunder? Why not lightning? Why not a giant miracle in the sky? The Bible doesn't give us one simple sentence saying, "This is exactly why God chose a bush." But the image itself is powerful. The bush was ordinary. It wasn't a giant tree. It wasn't something impressive. It was just a bush in the wilderness. And yet, God used something ordinary to get Moses' attention. That's one of the most interesting ideas in the whole story. Sometimes something doesn't have to look impressive to have an important purpose. Moses was also in an ordinary moment. He was working. He was taking care of sheep. He probably had no idea that his life was about to change. And then God called his name. Moses. Imagine hearing your name from a fire that isn't consuming the bush. That would definitely get your attention. But God wasn't simply trying to scare Moses. He had a mission for him. God told Moses that he had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt. He had heard their cries. And now he was going to act. And Moses was going to be part of it. God wanted Moses to go back to Egypt. Back to the place he had escaped from. Back to Pharaoh. Back to the people he had left behind. And his mission was huge. He was supposed to tell Pharaoh to let the Hebrew people go. Now, if you were Moses, what would you say? Sure, no problem. Probably not. Moses had a lot of questions. He didn't feel qualified. He didn't feel powerful. And he definitely didn't feel like the right person for the job. Moses asked, "Who am I?" That's actually one of the most relatable parts of the story. Because sometimes we look at people who do incredible things and think, They must have always been confident. But Moses wasn't. He was uncertain. He was nervous. He had doubts. And God didn't respond by telling Moses, "You're amazing. You can do anything." Instead, God gave Moses something much more important. He promised to be with him. That changed everything. Moses wasn't being asked to do this alone. God was going with him. And then Moses had another question. He asked what he should say if the Israelites asked who had sent him. God revealed his name to Moses. He identified himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who had made promises to their ancestors. The burning bush wasn't just a strange supernatural event. It was the beginning of a mission. Moses had spent years running away from Egypt. Now he was being asked to return. And that brings us to another interesting question. Why did God wait so long? Why didn't God call Moses when he was living in the palace? Why not when Moses was young? Why wait until Moses was an older shepherd living in the wilderness? We aren't given a simple answer. But the story shows us something important. Moses had changed. He wasn't the same man who had left Egypt. He had experienced failure. He had experienced fear. He had lived a quiet life. And now he was ready to become something he never expected to be. A leader. Not because Moses thought he was ready, but because God called him. And the burning bush became the moment when Moses' ordinary life became extraordinary. But here's something else that's easy to miss. The miracle wasn't just that the bush was burning. The miracle was what happened afterward. Moses went back to Egypt. He confronted Pharaoh. He stood before a powerful ruler. And eventually, the Israelites were freed from slavery. But that all began with one small bush in the wilderness. One ordinary object. One unexpected moment. One voice calling Moses by name. And maybe that's why this story has lasted for thousands of years. Because most people don't feel like heroes. Most people feel ordinary. They work. They worry. They make mistakes. They wonder if they're good enough. Moses felt that way too. He had made mistakes. He had run away. He didn't believe he was capable of doing what God asked. And yet, his story didn't end with his failure. It was only beginning. The burning bush reminds us that something can look small and still be incredibly important. Moses didn't know what was coming. He was simply following sheep through the desert. Then he noticed something unusual. He stopped. He looked closer. And that moment changed history. So the next time you hear the story of Moses and the burning bush, remember this. The biggest moments in life don't always begin with something huge. Sometimes they begin with something small. A strange light. A surprising opportunity. A conversation. A question. Or even a moment when you simply stop and pay attention. Moses thought he was just taking care of sheep. But God had a much bigger plan for him. And that burning bush wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because after Moses walked away from that mountain, he was heading straight back to Egypt. Straight toward Pharaoh. And straight into one of the greatest adventures in the Bible. But that's a story for next time. So now you know why God spoke to Moses through a burning bush. It wasn't just about fire. It was about getting Moses' attention. It was about calling an ordinary man to do something extraordinary. And most importantly, it was a reminder that Moses would not have to do it alone. Sometimes the person who feels least prepared can still be the person chosen for the biggest mission. And sometimes, all it takes is stopping long enough to notice the burning bush. What would you do if you were Moses and suddenly heard your name coming from a burning bush? Would you run away? Or would you get closer? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to keep following Moses' incredible journey, make sure you stick around. Because the next part gets even crazier.